Hey guys, and welcome back. So in the previous nugget, we explored some solutions that we could use in order to monitor our CPU utilization as well as our memory utilization. Now in this nugget right here, we're going to be looking at some additional tools that we can use with respect to monitoring, and we'll also focus on disk I/O, i.e. disk input-output monitoring. Now the first command which I just want to touch upon is the uptime command. So if we go into the man page here, we can see here this is actually going to allow us to see how long our system has been running. It's also going to tell us our load averages. Now we're going to see three different values within our output with the uptime command, and these three different values are going to correlate to three different time spans. The first one is 1 minute, the second one is 5 minutes, and the last value correlates to the system load average over the last 15 minutes. Now when we're actually talking about the system load averages right here, it says here, this is the average number of processes that are either runnable or in an uninterruptible state. Now ultimately what we're really talking about here is CPU usage. So a runnable state is when the CPU is being used or a process is waiting to use the CPU. Now with respect to an uninterruptible state, this is when the process is waiting for input-output access, i.e. the hard disk may be fully utilized, therefore a particular process has to wait before it can access the disk in order to execute a particular task. Now these load averages we are seeing within this uptime command relates to this type of information right here. Now one thing to note about the output with respect to the uptime command, and let me just press Q to clear my screen. Now when we're talking about our three different values of 1 minute, 5 minutes and 15 minutes, we're actually going to see the values denoted a particular way. Now if we happen to see the value 0.5, what this tells us is that the CPU is ultimately half used, okay? Kind of makes sense, 0.5, half used. If the CPU is at the value of 1, that means that it's being fully utilized, whereas if it's at 0. Let's say maybe 25, then only a quarter of the CPU is being used, and again you can see this at different time intervals. Now a few important points to note is that you might actually see a value such as 1.5. This is going to tell you that your CPU really is being taxed, because whilst it might not make sense that how can 1.5 of the CPU being used if 1 is the entire CPU being used, what this is actually indicating to us is that some processes are having to wait, and as such, the CPU is in effect being overloaded. So if we get a value greater than 1, well, we may have problems to address. Now, one thing I just want to point out here is that the values I'm giving you relates to if you happen to have one CPU available. If you happen to have, let's say for example, 4 CPUs on your system, this actually changes the values. So think about this. If I happen to see the value from the uptime command and the value is at 1, so 1.0, you may automatically think that the CPU is at full utilization. In actuality, what this means in the context of having 4 CPUs, only 25% of the CPU is being used. Ultimately what you're doing is you're dividing this number here by the number of CPUs, so it's 1 divided by 4 CPUs is actually 0.25, so only 25% is being used. Again, if we happen to see something like say 0.5 being used over 4 CPUs, the CPUs are actually not at half utilization. Instead, it's going to be 0.5 divided by 4. Instead, this is only going to come out as 12.5% utilization. Now, if we actually happen to run this command here, uptime, we can see these values right here, 0.09, 0.07, and 0.01. Again, these are values over 1 minute in this case here, 5 minutes in this case, and 15 minutes in this case. So the uptime command really is a valuable command that we can use to assess these types of values. It really does give us insight into our system. Now, the next thing I want to talk to you about is relating to I/O wait, i.e. input, output, wait. So where am I going with this? So what I/O wait actually is, it's ultimately a percentage of CPU actions that are waiting for disk access. So like I happen to say, when we talk about I/O waiting, if you had maybe say a program, perhaps it might be a browser, and your system is already using 100% of the disk, then your browser, which needs disk access in order to perform its actual task, this process, i.e. the process being used for the browser opening, this is actually going to go into a state of I/O block. So input, output has been blocked. In real terms, what this means for us as the user is that the system is overloaded, at least in respect to the disk utilization. So when you try to open that browser, you double click that icon, the process might actually hang, i.e. the browser is just not going to pop up on your screen. You might be waiting a while because the process really does need to wait until the resource is free. And here is the thing, the actual percentage of CPU processes that have to wait, that is referred to as the I/O wait percentage. Now, one of the ways we can interrogate this type of information comes from my favorite command. We just talked about it in the previous nugget. That happens to be the top command. Let's try and check this out and see the information we can actually derive. So what I'll do here is I'll just clear my screen right now, and I'll use that good old command top. So check this out. There is a particular piece of information we can focus in relating to our I/O wait. If you can spot it here, it's this one right here, which is, in fact, let me get my drawing pen because it's not showing quite so well. This one right here, WA. So this number is ultimately a percentage, and right now it is at 0.0. That is good, meaning that we don't have any CPU processes actually waiting. So we know we actually have a tool downloaded on our system which we can use to stress our system, to simulate this type of problem. So that command is going to be the stress command. So what I will do actually is I'll go to my options and I will open a new terminal. So we have a new terminal right here. What I'm going to do is use this stress command. If I happen to say man stress, we can see we have the option of -d or --HDD. This is going to spawn the number of workers spinning on right. Basically, this is going to allow us to simulate a lot of disk utilization. So what I'll do here then is I'll press Q to quit, clear the screen, and I will say stress --HDD, and I'll choose the number 1 for one hard drive process. If I hit enter, in fact, before I actually do this, let me minimize this. Keep an eye on this value here, the WA value, okay? So if I hit enter now, that is going to actually spin up a process, and you can automatically see, or rather instantly see, should I say, the waiting value, the percentage is actually beginning to spike. That is due to the fact that we're actually stressing our hard disk, so to speak. We are really using that resource, and as such, if I actually try to go and maybe say open a browser, click here, it might take a little bit of time to actually open up. It's not going to be quite so snappy. That is because a lot of my processes are actually having to wait right now. They're not getting access to the disk, therefore they can't operate as they ordinarily would. So right now we can see here, we're still waiting on this browser and waiting and waiting and waiting. Sadly, our browser is kind of at the back of the queue. It can't access this resource, it's being hogged. So if I actually just stop stress by pressing Ctrl+C, now straight away, the browser is going to load up because we are no longer overloading the hard disk. Therefore, the process could access the resource and lo and behold, we could open up the browser. But again, think about what we're actually seeing here. In this case, we had a problem whereby our browser was very, very slow to load. If we just were happened to be looking at the top command, we would have seen that the I/O wait value was around 80% or 90%, and we could actually tell or infer that the hard disk was being particularly taxed. So straight away, with our troubleshooting mind on, we would have quite a good idea of where to go to solve that problem, or the type of action we would need to take in order to solve that problem. Now, honestly, as helpful as Top is, and it is very helpful with respect to input-output, it is a little bit limited. So what I want to do is to actually show you some additional tools that we can use. So if I press Q to quit, I'll just close this terminal for now, and I'll also close my browser for now. I'll clear the screen, and what I'm going to do is install something called I/O Top. This is like Top, but for input/output. So I'll say sudo apt install IO, I can get it, IO Top, hit enter, type in the password. This is going to begin installation. Just give it a little minute or so. Now if I try to run the command IO Top, watch what happens. Operation not permitted. You can probably guess where I'm going with this. The way to actually use this command requires super user privileges. So I'll clear the screen and I'll say sudo IO Top, and I will hit enter. So what we're seeing is top like information, but we are really focusing on this right here, the IO utilization, and what processes happen to be using a lot of disk resource. So what I can actually do here is I can go and open up a new terminal, and we'll do a similar thing to what we saw before. We'll use the stress command to actually put some stress on the disk. So I'll say stress --HDD, and I'll just say 1. And now the stress command should actually be putting some pretty hard work on the I/O, but look at this. We're actually getting to see the input/output and getting to see what is taking up a lot of that. So we can see the stress HDD1 taking up quite a lot of the resources. And again, if we go back here, I just press Ctrl C to stop this. Instantly that's going to calm back down, and the IO Top command shows us that. So a really valuable tool right here, as opposed to just using the regular Top command. Now, what I will do here is I'll press Q to quit this, clear the screen. I'll now say sudo apt install, and the package I want to install is called sysstat. So if I hit enter here, this is going to install the sysstat package. Just give it a little minute or so. So now I should have access to a command called iostat. If I go into the page here, this is going to report CPU statistics for input/output. So this is going to give us, again, just like with IO Top, IO related information and statistics. Now this is, in my opinion, not quite as good as IO Top, but nevertheless the examination does mention IOstat within the exam objectives, so it does actually make sense that we are actually familiar with it. So I'll clear the screen and I'll just say IOstat. And what this is ultimately doing is giving us a snapshot. So we're getting to see a lot of information about data being written to disk and read from disk. This is ultimately what is taxing the particular disk. We can see the IO wait percentage right here, which in this case is 1.77, quite low. But like I say, this is really just a snapshot, whereas if you recall, the IO Top command was giving us real-time updates and much more expansive. So I can clear the screen. Another command we want to be able to be familiar with, again, not quite as good as just using IO Top, but the exam does require we are familiar. If we go in to the man page for the SAR command, this is going to allow you to collect, report, or save system activity information. So you can scroll right through this man page and you will see plenty options and plenty descriptions of what this command can actually do. There is quite a lot here. For now, I'll press Q. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to say SAR 1 and then 5. So what this command is going to do, it's going to allow us to take 5 different data points 1 second apart. So this is quite good to check how things progress over a time frame. In this case here, 5 seconds, because we have 5 recordings every single second. So it's a little bit better of a snapshot than IOstat gives us. We have more data points, for example, but it's not quite, like I say, as good as IO Top, giving us that streaming information and continually updating. But nevertheless, let's hit enter and see how we go. We're going to get 5 pieces of information. So we start at 27 seconds. We get our first data point at 28. That's number 1, then 2, 3, 4, and 5. So 5 data points, 1 second apart. We can see the percentage. So we get statistics over a whole bunch of different types of information, such as system or idle. But really the one we are focusing on right now is I/O weight. Now, as it transpires, we are not actually taxing the I/O. So the values right here all happen to be 0. But as you can expect, we could, like we say, actually stress the HDD once again. And we can rerun this command by hitting enter. We get 5 different values right here. And at the very bottom, we get the average of those 5 values. And again, we could change these values to be maybe 2 and 3, meaning we will get 3 data points 2 seconds apart. If we hit enter, we can see here the actual times. The first one on 00, the next one on 02, the next one on 04. And at the bottom, we get the average of those 3 over that time period. So again, another really cool command to be aware of. Now what I'll do here is I'll just press Ctrl+C to stop this stress test. In fact, let me just close this terminal right here and I'll clear the screen. Now another command I want to show you is one called LSOF. This is going to allow us to list our open files. This should be one you will recall from the LPIC 1 examination, no doubt. And like I say, it's going to allow us to track the open files on our system, being all the open files. Now, if we just happen to use this command on its own, LSOF, we're going to be bombarded with an absolute megaton of information, just far too much to actually read. But we can do things such as filtering to make this information much more palatable. So what I'll do actually, let me just quickly open terminal, and we'll just rerun this stress command. What I can actually do here is I can run this command, okay? That would just show me absolutely everything. But what if I happen to grep for stress itself? Now we can actually see here what files are being opened by the stress program. So if we happen to note a particular process or a particular command is causing a lot of I/O issues, we can actually correlate what actual files are being opened or being used by that particular command or process. So this just gives us more granular information that we can use to interrogate what is exactly going on. Now, one point I should actually add, and in fact, again, let me just stop this right here. One point I should add is that with respect to disk I/O problems, one of the ways, of course, we can stop such a thing is by not running so many processes that are actually requiring that resource. But as you know, in the world of enterprise computing, it's not quite so easy just to make sure that everyone is giving up processes that they might actually need in case we may need better solutions altogether. Now, one of those solutions may be that the write and reading of the hard disk is kind of slow and inefficient. And this can actually cause things to be bogged down, because the longer it takes a particular process to write and to read, the longer it's going to engage that resource, i.e. the more of a backlog on that resource is going to happen. One of the best ways you can actually ease this type of problem is by changing things from a hard disk to an SSD, a solid state drive. This has got far faster and more efficient read and write operations, and this will actually alleviate a lot of the problems that you're seeing if you do happen to be encountering a lot of I/O weight on your system. Okie doke, so that is us for our introduction into being able to monitor our disk I/O utilization. Like I say, we saw a handful of different commands, some more useful than others. But as we know, in these exams, very often you still have to be able to be familiar with perhaps some less efficient and older commands, such as what we saw with respect to the IOStat command, for example. So really what I'm saying is, don't just skip over the commands that may not be so obviously useful. Definitely dig in and be familiar with them, at least just for the purposes of the examination. Okay doke, so that is us for monitoring disk input output. The next thing we have to tackle is network input output and how we can actually monitor that too. And well, that is what we're going to be doing in the very next nuggets. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.